So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Revive Uchiha Clan? So let's start the series. The weight of a name he doesn't bear. The first thing Naruto learned was silence. Not the quiet of an empty room. The NBU barracks were never truly empty, but the dense, listening silence of withheld words. It was a silence that lived in the pauses between the third Hokage's carefully measured speeches, in the way the academy instructor's eyes slid over him like oil on water, in the abrupt cessation of playground chatter when he approached. It wasn't the loud, jeering hatred some kids' parents whispered about the fox. This was colder. It was administrative. It was the silence of a file being closed, a door being shut, a name being struck from a record no one would ever let him see. He lived in a small, functional apartment within the ANBU auxiliary complex, a place of gray concrete and reinforced doors. It was not a home. It was a holding cell with a kitchenette. His allowance appeared weekly in a sealed envelope on his table. His groceries were delivered by a masked operative who never spoke. He was, officially, Naruto Uzumaki, ward of the state, a child of unknown, lost parents, his surname a gift from the Hokage's records to grant him some semblance of roots. He knew it was a lie. The name felt like a borrowed shirt, too large in some places, chafing in others. The second thing he learned was observation. To survive the silence, he watched. He watched the way the Uchiha police force moved through the market, a unit, a flock of dark hair and proud backs, their steps synchronized not by training but by a shared, unspoken rhythm. He watched the way other clan children wore their symbols like second skins, the Nara's deer, the Akimichi circle, the Yamanaka's delicate pin. He had no symbol. He had a spiral on his jacket, a cheap, mass-produced logo for a ramen shop he liked, the closest thing to an emblem he could claim. And he watched her. Uchiha Mikoto. The wife of the Uchiha clan head. She was a figure of distant grace, often seen on the edges of formal events, or walking with measured calm through the village. Naruto's first memory of her was not dramatic. He was 5, sitting alone on a bench by the training grounds, nursing a scraped knee from a fall he'd taken while trying to practice tree walking. His chakra, a wild, sputtering thing inside him, had refused to cooperate, flaring out and burning the bark before sending him tumbling. She had appeared not from the path, but from the dappled shadows of the woods, as if she'd been standing there for some time. She didn't smile. Her dark eyes, so deep they seemed to absorb the light, held an expression he couldn't decipher, a profound, weary focus. "You're pushing your chakra through your heel," she said, her voice quiet, melodic yet devoid of warmth. It was a statement, not a greeting. "The tenketsu there are underdeveloped in children. Use the soul. Distribute the flow." He'd stared, mute with surprise. No adult ever gave him direct instruction outside the mandated academy lessons. They monitored, they judged, they sometimes punished, but they did not teach. "Oh," he mumbled, looking at his dirty foot. "Okay." She didn't move closer. She simply stood, her hands folded within the wide sleeves of her kimono. "The chakra is unruly. You must be calm to guide it. Your emotion fuels the chaos." "It's always like that," he admitted, a burst of frustrated confession. "It feels hot and buzzy. And sometimes it gets loud in my head." A flicker of something, pain? Recognition, passed through her eyes so quickly he thought he imagined it. "Then you must become quieter than the buzz," she said. "Not by fighting it. By listening to it. Until you can find the current beneath the noise." She then turned and walked away, leaving no opportunity for further questions. She didn't look back. But the next day, a plain, unmarked package was left at his door. Inside was a small, ancient-looking scroll on beginner chakra meditation techniques, its calligraphy precise and beautiful. There was no note. He devoured it. The techniques helped, a little. The buzzing didn't stop, but he found moments of stillness within it. That became the pattern. Every few months, in his most abject loneliness or after a particularly violent flare of his unstable chakra that left him nauseous and shunned, she would appear. A brief, impersonal correction on a taijutsu stance he was practicing alone. A comment on the proper way to wrap a kunai grip to prevent blisters. Once, after he'd been ill for a week with a fever that made his chakra feel like a boiling kettle, he found a thermos of mild, healing broth on his windowsill, still warm. She was never affectionate. She was never motherly. She was a ghost of practicality, a corrective pressure in the void of his neglect. He began to watch for her. Not in a hopeful way, but with the intense focus of a naturalist studying a rare, skittish bird. He noticed things. She never interacted with him where other Uchiha could see. Her interventions always aligned with moments of extreme duress, as if she had a hidden gauge on his suffering. And her eyes, when they did meet his, held a depth of sorrow so vast it frightened him. It didn't match her neutral tone. It was like looking at two different people layered into one. One afternoon, when he was nearly 7, he worked up the courage to speak beyond the technical. He'd seen her observing from the shrine terrace as he failed, again and again, to perform the Academy's basic clone technique. His clones were pathetic, shimmering, translucent things that collapsed into puffs of malformed chakra. The other students had long since mastered it. Exhausted and humiliated, he turned towards the terrace. She was still there, a statue against the redwood. Why? He called out, his voice cracking. Not why can't I do it? But a bigger, more desperate question. Why do you help me? The distance between them was too great for normal conversation, but he saw her posture stiffen. She was silent for a long minute, the wind stirring her dark hair. When she spoke, her voice carried on the breeze, thin and brittle. Wasted potential is a tragedy. It is also a danger. Then she added, so softly he almost missed it. To everyone. It was the first time her words felt like a blow. Not help, but a warning. He was potential. He was danger. He was a tragedy. He was not a child. He looked down at his hands, which were trembling slightly. The buzzing in his core was a low, agitated hum. What's wrong with my chakra? He asked, the question he never dared voice to the Hokage or the Academy medics. Mikoto did not answer for so long he thought she'd left. Then, it is not one thing, but two. They are in conflict. You must learn to hold both, or you will be torn apart. She paused. That is all I can say. She left then, and he didn't see her again for 3 months. The third thing Naruto learned was the architecture of absence. His life was defined not by what was present, but by what was conspicuously missing. Missing parents. Missing history. Missing explanations. The most profound absence was the one he couldn't name, the gaping hole where a sense of belonging should have been. He was permitted to attend the academy, but he was a satellite, orbiting the social gravity of his classmates. He wasn't bullied in the traditional sense, he was strategically isolated. Clan children were polite but distant, following unspoken household rules about interaction with the village ward. The civilian children echoed their parents' fear and bureaucratic disdain. Iruka-sensei tried, in his harried way, but his kindness was generic, applied to Naruto as the problem student, not to Naruto as a person. Naruto spent his free time wandering the village, a solitary mapmaker of its unnoticed spaces. He knew the best hidden rooftops for sunning stray cats, the drainage tunnels where the sound of the village became a hollow roar, the exact spot on the western wall where the setting sun turned the Hokage monument to gold. He was a ghost in the machinery of Konoha, and he began to suspect that was by design. His suspicion hardened into a cold certainty during the Kyuubi attack memorial. He was 7. No one told him to stay away, but the weight of the directive was palpable. The NBU guard assigned to his barracks that day, a man with a boar mask, simply stood in front of the door, his arms crossed. Naruto spent the day inside, listening to the distant, mournful chorus of the village bells, feeling a strange, resonant ache in his own chest, a hollow echo of the collective grief from which he was barred. That night, driven by a confused, angry impulse, he sneaked out. He was good at moving unseen, it was his primary skill. He made his way to the memorial stone, a place he'd seen but never approached. The ceremony was long over. The offerings of flowers and incense were fresh under the moonlight. He stood before the endless carved names, feeling nothing but a deeper, more profound isolation. Their deaths had meaning. Their names were remembered. He was alive, and he was nothing. A rustle in the trees. He turned, expecting ANBU. It was Itachi Uchiha, 13 years old and already an ANBU captain, a legend and a ghost himself. He stood at the edge of the clearing, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. They looked at each other in silence. Naruto knew who he was, everyone knew the prodigy, the heir. You shouldn't be here, Itachi said. His voice was calm, devoid of threat or warmth. Why? Naruto challenged, the anger bubbling up. Because I don't belong with them? He jerked his chin at the stone. Itachi's dark eyes seemed to gleam. Because your presence here would cause pain you do not intend. And draw attention you do not want. I always have attention I don't want, Naruto muttered, looking away. This is different. Itachi took a single step forward. Naruto noticed his movements were utterly silent, a level of control that was terrifying. You feel watched. You are. But not for the reasons you think. Naruto's head snapped up. What reasons? Itachi didn't answer directly. He studied Naruto's face with an unsettling, clinical intensity. Your chakra control is poor. But your situational awareness is exceptional. You notice patterns. You should trust that instinct. The pattern of your life is not an accident. What's that supposed to mean? Naruto asked, his heart pounding. It means the silence you live in is a constructed one. Walls have builders. Itachi's gaze drifted past him, to the memorial stone. Some people are walled in for protection. Others are walled in to be forgotten. You must decide which you are, and who built the walls. He then performed a simple, perfect body flicker technique, disappearing without a sound or puff of smoke. He was just gone, leaving Naruto alone with the names of the dead in a new, more terrifying kind of silence, a silence filled with implication, with hidden design. Naruto walked back to his barracks, his mind racing. Walls have builders. Mikoto's sporadic, secretive help. Itachi's cryptic warning. The Hokage's pitying, evasive eyes. The way the Uchiha as a whole seemed to move through the village with a tense, collective awareness, as if expecting a blow to fall from within their own walls. A terrible, thrilling suspicion began to crystallize. His loneliness was not a natural disaster. It was a policy. His ignorance was not a lack of information. It was a deliberate erasure. He lay in his narrow bed that night, the buzzing in his core a frantic, sympathetic vibration. He thought of Mikoto's eyes, full of a sorrow that had no right to be there for a stranger's child. He thought of her words. Wasted potential is a tragedy. It is also a danger. To everyone. He wasn't just Naruto Uzumaki, the lonely orphan. He was something else. Something that had required his past to be scrubbed away, his present to be a cage of quiet observation, and his future to be a secret held in the sorrowful eyes of an Uchiha matriarch. The weight of his unknown name pressed down on him in the dark. It was no longer an absence. It was a presence. A living, breathing secret sleeping in his blood, and it was beginning to wake up. Chapter 2: The Architecture of a Cage. The buzzing was getting worse. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a physical sensation, a hive of agitated hornets living in his bone marrow. It flared with his frustration, simmered with his loneliness, and spiked into painful, dizzying arcs whenever he felt a sudden, sharp emotion, a rare flash of kindness from Irika, a glimpse of Mikoto's retreating back, the cold contempt in a shopkeeper's eyes. The Academy's standard chakra control exercises were like trying to dam a river with his fingers. His attempts at the clone technique remained a humiliating public spectacle, producing phantoms that wept chakra and collapsed into oily, iridescent puddles. The other children's mockery had matured from taunts into a quiet, professional disdain. They were shinobi in training, and he was a malfunctioning tool. Even the teachers had ceased to correct him, they just marked his failures and moved on. The only one who seemed to register his struggle as anything other than pathetic ineptitude was Irika, whose brow would furrow with a concern that seemed to go beyond mere pedagogical frustration. It was Irika who, after yet another disastrous class where Naruto's attempted transformation had left him shimmering with unstable orange light for a full minute, finally intervened. Not with extra lessons, but with an appointment. Report to the Konoha General Hospital's Chakra Analysis Wing after Academy hours tomorrow, Irika said, his voice carefully neutral as he handed Naruto a sealed scroll. It's a standard assessment for students with atypical chakra development. The Hokage has approved it. Standard. The word was a lie, and they both knew it. Naruto had never heard of anyone else going for such a thing. He took the scroll, feeling the fine, expensive parchment. It felt like a warrant. The hospital's chakra analysis wing was not in the main building. It was a low, windowless annex of pale stone, connected by a sealed underground tunnel. The air inside was cool, sterile, and utterly silent, absorbing sound. A medic nin with a pinched face and no name tag escorted him to a circular chamber. The walls were inscribed with dense, glowing seals that made Naruto's skin prickle and the buzzing in his core rise to a whine. In the center of the room stood two men. The first was the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, looking older and wearier than his public portraits, the lines on his face like trenches. He gave Naruto a small, sad nod. The second was a man Naruto had only seen in shadows and from a distance, Danzo Shimura. He leaned on a cane, his right arm and eye heavily bandaged, his presence exuding a dry, sepulchral cold. His single visible eye fixed on Naruto with the dispassionate interest of a geologist examining a peculiar rock. Naruto, Hiruzen began, his voice echoing slightly in the sealed room. This is an examination to better understand your unique chakra system. It is for your safety, and the village's. You must cooperate fully. Danzo didn't bother with preamble. Begin the resonance scan, he said to the medic nin, who bowed and activated a sequence of seals on the floor. The room hummed to life, the glyphs on the walls brightening. A wave of pressure washed over Naruto, insistent and probing. It felt like invisible fingers were trying to pry apart the seams of his spirit. The buzzing in his core erupted into a roar of defiance. His own chakra, a turbulent, sun-yellow energy, surged outward in a reflexive shield. But beneath it, something else stirred, something vast, dark, and hot, a sleeping beast grumbling at the intrusion. Resistance pattern alpha confirmed, the medic nin said tonelessly. The secondary chakra source is reactive and deeply integrated. Barrier is holding, but stress levels are rising. Proceed to stage 2, Danzo ordered. Apply gentle chakra suppression. Monitor the primary source's stability. A new set of seals flared, this time a cool, blue network that settled over Naruto like a leaden blanket. It pressed down, trying to smother his own chakra. The effect was instantaneous and agonizing. It was like trying to breathe with a weight on his chest. His yellow chakra flickered, dimmed. And the thing beneath it, the dark heat, didn't like being pressed. It shifted, not rising, but squeezing. Naruto gasped, falling to his knees. A searing pain lanced from his gut up through his eyes. For a split second, his vision swam, the world bleeding into shades of gray, the chakra flows in the room becoming visible as pulsating rivers of light and dark. He saw the intricate, constricting lattice of the suppression seals, the calm, deep blue flow of the Hokage, and the dead gray, hungry void that seemed to swirl around Danzo. Then, a sharper, hotter pain erupted behind his eyes, and the vision shattered into static. Fascinating, Danzo murmured, taking a step closer. Under sufficient external pressure, the latent structure attempts to manifest. Not the tailed beast chakra, the other one. The inherited potential. Hiruzen's face tightened. Danzo, that's enough. The strain is evident. The strain is data, Hiruzen, Danzo said, his eye never leaving Naruto, who was trembling on the floor, sweat dripping from his chin. The boy is a paradox. A vessel of immense destructive power, and a carrier of the most potent dojutsu bloodline, currently locked in a mutually suppressive stalemate. The Kyuubi's chakra acts as an inhibitor to the Sharingan's development. A natural cage, albeit an unstable one. And vice versa. His Uchiha chakra, underdeveloped and unawakened, irritates the beast's seal. A fascinating, dangerous equilibrium. Naruto's head was pounding, but the words cut through the pain. Uchiha. Sharingan. Inherited. The words slammed into the scaffolding of suspicions he'd been building. They weren't suspicions anymore. They were confirmed facts, spoken in this sterile, secret room as if he weren't even a person, but a specimen. You! Naruto rasped, forcing his head up to look at Hiruzen. You knew. Hiruzen's eyes held a universe of regret, but his voice was firm. It was necessary, Naruto. For your survival. For the village's peace. My survival? A bitter laugh choked out of him, mingled with a sob. What is this? This hurts. Every day, it hurts. And you knew why. The anger cut through the suppression. His yellow chakra flared again, sputtering and wild. Your chakra is unstable because you house two mighty legacies that were never meant to coexist. Danzo stated coldly. The Kyuubi, and the blood of the Uchiha. The Sharingan, in its evolved states, can control tailed beasts. The Kyuubi, aware on some primal level, reacts to the presence of that potential within you. It suppresses it, agitates it. Your so-called buzzing is the sound of a spiritual civil war. Your emotional volatility is the battlefield. He gestured with his cane. The Sandaime, in his misplaced compassion, chose to hide you. To give you a false name and hope the problem would resolve itself. But a weapon does not cease to be a weapon because it is placed in a drawer. It merely becomes a hidden danger. I'm not a weapon, Naruto snarled. You are a child, Hiruzen said sharply, a flash of the god of shinobi in his old eyes. And this examination is concluded. Danzo, we have the data. Medic, release the suppression. The leaden blanket lifted. Naruto slumped forward, panting, the immediate pain receding but leaving a deep, throbbing ache behind his eyes and a hollow coldness in his gut. The revelations echoed in the silence, more deafening than the room's hum. Danzo turned to leave, pausing at the door. Consider, Hiruzen. A tool that does not know its purpose is more likely to break, or to break something else. Ignorance is not a shield, it is a fragility. His single eye swept over Naruto one last time. The Uchiha compound is a pressure cooker. Fugaku's faction grows restless. When the pot explodes, where will this misplaced piece of shrapnel land? He carries the spark of their fire. He will be burned by it, or he will burn others with it. He left. The heavy door sealed behind him with a final, ominous thud. Hiruzen knelt beside Naruto, a hand on his shoulder. Naruto flinched away. The kindness now felt like the worst kind of lie. Naruto. Hiruzen sighed, the weight of decades in the sound. What Danzo said is true, in its cruel way. You are the son of Uchiha Mikoto. Born in secret, during a time of great tension after the Kyuubi's attack. The beast was sealed within you, by Minato Namikaze, to save the village. Your parentage was erased to protect you from the backlash. The Uchiha were, and are, suspected of involvement in the attack. Had your lineage been known, you would have been a target for their enemies, and a political pawn within the clan itself. You would have been torn apart. And my father? Naruto whispered, the question a raw wound. Hiruzen closed his eyes for a moment. That is a truth I cannot give you yet. To do so would unravel everything, and place you in even greater danger. You must trust that it was done out of love. Mikoto's silence is her love. It is the only way she can protect you. Protect me? Naruto looked at his own hands, still trembling. She watches me hurt. She gives me scrolls and broth. She tells me I'm a danger. That's not love. That's maintenance. It is the love possible in a cage, Hiruzen said, standing slowly, his joints creaking. The world is not kind, Naruto. Sometimes survival is the only gift we can give. You are not just Naruto Uzumaki. You are a secret. And secrets in Konoha have sharp edges. You must be stronger than your chakra. You must be wiser than your anger. Your path will be harder than any others, because you must walk it without knowing where it began. He placed the sealed scroll from Iruka on the floor beside Naruto. This contains a specialized chakra meditation regimen. It will not fix the conflict within you, but it may help you find moments of balance. Use it. For now, this is all we can do. The Hokage left him then, alone in the humming, sealed chamber with the glowing walls that had just dissected his soul. The buzzing had changed. It wasn't just noise now. It was a chorus. The roar of a fox made of hatred. The silent, desperate scream of a bloodline fighting to be born. And his own small, human voice, trapped between them. He didn't cry. The revelation was too vast, too cold for tears. He felt defined. Not as a person, but as a containment problem. A political error. A biological contradiction. Son of a ghost, vessel of a demon, heir to eyes he couldn't open. He left the annex and walked back through the twilight streets. The village looked different. Every glance from a passing shinobi felt evaluative. Every Uchiha police officer he saw, their proud, severe faces, their dark, observant eyes, sent a jolt through him. My blood. My clan. They don't know me. They would hate me. He saw the compound walls in the distance, high and imposing. Not a home. A fortress that held a piece of him prisoner. He thought of Mikoto. Mother. The word was a foreign, terrifying object in his mind. Her sorrowful eyes now had a name, guilt. Her distance, a necessity. Her cryptic help, a desperate attempt to arm the child she could not claim. He climbed to his favorite rooftop, overlooking the training grounds. He unfurled the scroll Hiruzen had given him. The meditation techniques were advanced, subtle. They weren't about controlling the two warring energies, but about creating a small, still point of self in the center of the storm. It was about listening, as Mikoto had said, but not to find a current. To find himself in the noise. As the moon rose, he tried. He sat cross-legged, ignoring the lingering ache behind his eyes, and followed the instructions. He didn't try to quiet the buzzing or the simmering heat. He acknowledged them. The fox. The blood. They are there. Then he looked for the space that was neither. A small, quiet core of observation, of choice. It was infinitesimal, a pinprick of calm in a hurricane. But for the first time, he found it. He was not just the conflict. He was the one experiencing the conflict. It was a fragile distinction, but it was his. He opened his eyes. The world was just a world again, not a network of hostile intents. He looked towards the Uchiha compound. Somewhere behind those walls, a woman who was his mother was living a lie. Somewhere in the village, a man who might be his father was a secret too dangerous to tell. And he was here, on a rooftop, with a name that wasn't his and a body that was a battlefield. The cage had walls now. He could see them. They were made of secrets, politics, blood, and beast. He was inside. But for the first time, he had begun to map the bars. Chapter 3: The Ghost in the Compound. Knowledge was not a liberation. It was a new kind of prison. Now, every glance Naruto cast towards the Uchiha compound was loaded with a terrible, gravitational pull. The high walls weren't just a clan's boundary. They were the edges of a story he was forbidden to read. The police patrols weren't just maintaining order. They were the unknowing guards of his own erased history. The buzzing in his core, now understood, became a constant, physical reminder of his divided nature. He was a secret, and secrets have weight. The specialized meditation regimen helped, but only as a dam helps a flood. It provided a fragile structure to channel the chaos, but the pressure never ceased. He could now sometimes locate that still, central point of self, but holding it was like balancing on a needle's tip during an earthquake. His academy performance didn't improve. If anything, the conscious effort to maintain internal equilibrium made his external control more clumsy, his movements hesitant. He was thinking about his chakra instead of using it, and the result was a string of new, spectacular failures. Iruka-sensei's concern deepened into palpable worry. He began keeping Naruto after class, not for remedial training, but for mundane tasks, sorting scrolls, cleaning the training dummies. It was during one of these sessions, as Naruto meticulously wiped down a wooden post scarred with kunai marks, that Iruka spoke, his voice carefully casual. "You've been quieter lately, Naruto." Naruto shrugged, not looking up. "Just tired." "It's more than that." Iruka leaned against a desk, watching him. "The hospital visit, it shook you." A spark of anger flared, and the buzzing rose in pitch. "He knows. He might not know everything, But he knows something's wrong with me. Something official. They just said my chakra's weird. Told me to meditate. It wasn't a full lie. Irika was silent for a moment. Sometimes, he said slowly, choosing his words like a man crossing thin ice, this village asks a lot of its children. Asks them to carry burdens they shouldn't have to. It's not fair. He paused. If you ever feel trapped by it, by what you are, or what people say you are, remember you have choices. You're not just what they made you. Naruto's hand stilled on the dummy. It was the closest any adult had ever come to acknowledging the cage. He looked at Irika, really looked. The scar across his nose, the weary kindness in his eyes. He wasn't offering answers. He was offering a rope thrown into the pit. Choices. What choices did a weapon have? To be used or to rust? Thanks, Irika-sensei. He mumbled, the words thick. It was all he could manage. The rope, however, had been thrown. The idea of choice, however abstract, took root. It manifested not in rebellion, but in a new direction for his obsessive observation. He began to study the Uchiha not with the vague curiosity of an outsider, but with the focused intensity of a spy mapping a target. He learned their patrol schedules, noted which members of the police force interacted with the Hokage's office, which ones drank at which taverns and grumbled into their sake. He watched Fugaku Uchiha from a distance, a man of stern, imposing presence, whose rare public appearances were like tectonic plates shifting, causing subtle adjustments in everyone around him. He saw no hint of softness, no crack through which a secret sun might be glimpsed. Only duty, stone-hard and unforgiving. And he watched Mikoto. This was harder, more painful, and more essential. He saw her now not as a mysterious benefactor, but as a fellow prisoner. He noticed the precise, almost ceremonial way she performed her public duties, attending clan meetings, overseeing the shrine's upkeep, hosting polite, tense teas with other clan matriarchs. Her elegance was a form of armor. Her calm was a performance. He began to see the tiny fractures. The way her eyes would linger for half a second too long on a playing child in the market before she schooled her expression back to neutrality. The almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw when Fugaku's name was mentioned in certain contexts. The single time he saw her, from his hidden perch on a water tower, alone in the private Uchiha gardens at dusk, simply standing still, her shoulders slumped under an invisible weight, her face turned to the dying light, utterly, devastatingly unguarded. She looked hollow. She looked like him. He wanted to hate her. It would have been easier. But he couldn't. He saw the cage she was in, and he recognized its architecture. His was made of anonymity and isolation. Hers was made of duty, surveillance, and a love she could only express through painful absence. His mapping project led him, one overcast afternoon, to a neglected corner of the village archives, a dusty sub-basement where outdated land surveys and pre-war clan census records were stored. He was looking for nothing in particular, just patterns, traces of how things were arranged. He found a brittle, moth-eaten scroll from the year of his birth. It was a standard housing and population ledger for the Uchiha district. Names, ages, family units. His finger, grimy from dust, trailed down the list of households under the main branch: Fugaku, Mikoto, Itachi, Sasuke. And then, a line below Sasuke's recorded birth, a single character, neatly inked but then struck through with a single, authoritative black line: Nanagashi. So-and-so. Nameless one. An entry erased. His breath caught. The air in the dusty basement turned to ice. He looked at the date of the ledger. 8 months after the Kyubi attack. He traced the black line with his fingertip. It was deliberate, final. Not a mistake. An eradication. Next to the struck-through entry, in a different, smaller hand, was a tiny, almost invisible seal, the stylized eye of the intelligence division. Danzo's mark. He didn't need the Hokage's confirmation anymore. Here it was, in faded ink and bureaucratic violence. He had existed. For a brief moment, in some ledger-keeper's record, he had been a fact in the Uchiha household. And then he had been unmade. A wave of dizziness washed over him, not from the chakra this time, but from a profound, existential vertigo. To see your own non-existence documented was a special kind of horror. The buzzing in his core surged in sympathetic rage, a hot, orange flicker dancing at the edges of his vision. He carefully rerolled the scroll, hiding it behind a crate of broken furniture records. It was evidence. Of what, he wasn't sure, but it was his. A piece of his ghost. Leaving the archives, the sky had darkened, promising rain. He took a long, meandering route back to the AMBU barracks, his mind a storm. The struck-through name. Mikoto's hollow silhouette. Danzo's cold eye. The Hokage's regret. He was walking through a ghost story, and he was the ghost. His path took him near the Uchiha compound's western wall, a section bordered by a thicket of neglected bamboo. As he passed, a low, strained voice cut through the rustle of leaves in the gathering wind. Unsustainable. The surveillance is not lessening, it's becoming more sophisticated. They no longer even bother to hide the ANBU in the trees. They stand on the rooftops and watch us cook dinner. Naruto froze, melting into the shadow of a tool shed. Peering through the bamboo, he saw two Uchiha men in police armor, partially hidden. One was older, with a severe scar across his chin. The other was Shursui Uchiha, known as Shursui of the Body Flicker. His face uncharacteristically grim. The Hokage assures father he is working for a diplomatic solution, Shursui said, his voice tight. The Hokage is an old man trying to hold back a tide with a broom, the older man hissed. Fugaku-sama's patience is worn thin. The memorial, the disrespect shown. It was a message. We are being quarantined. And when an infection is quarantined, the next step is excision. Don't say that, Yushiro-san, Shursui said, but his protest lacked force. It sounded weary. There are still paths. Itachi and I, we are working. Itachi spends more time in the Hokage's office than in the compound. Yushiro spat. Some wonder whose side he is truly on. And you are powerful, Shursui, but you are one man. Your famous eyes cannot see a peaceful future any more than mine can. Shursui's hand went unconsciously to his own eye. There is always a future. But it requires sacrifice. And trust. Trust is the first thing they took from us. Yushiro turned, his gaze sweeping the thicket. Naruto held his breath, pressing deeper into shadow. Be careful who you trust, Shursui. Even within these walls. Secrets have a way of festering. The two men moved off, their conversation dropping to inaudible murmurs. Naruto stood frozen, the cold rain beginning to fall, soaking his hair and clothes. The words echoed in his skull. Quarantine. Excision. Infection. They weren't just talking about prejudice. They were talking about something imminent, something violent. The pot Danzo had mentioned was not just simmering, it was about to boil over. And Mikoto was in there. Itachi was in there. Sasuke, the proud, oblivious heir, was in there. His family, who didn't know him, was heading for a cliff. The storm inside him met the storm outside. The buzzing became a roar. The conflict of energies, agitated by his fear and this horrific new context, spiraled out of his fragile control. A surge of hot, red chakra, not the fox's, but something sharper, more personal, lanced up from his gut. It felt like a blade twisting behind his eyes. He stumbled away from the wall, vision blurring. The world took on a strange, pulsing quality. He saw the chakra of the village not as distinct flows, but as a morass of fearful grays and anxious yellows, centered like a vortex of swirling black and crimson around the Uchiha compound, a nexus of paranoia and gathering rage. And from within that vortex, he saw 2 points of calm, deep blue light. One was familiar, steady but sorrowful, Mikoto. The other was a colder, more complex blue, threaded with streaks of painful violet, Itachi. He wasn't seeing with his eyes. He was perceiving with something else, something raw and awakening. It lasted only 3 heartbeats before a white-hot poker of agony seared through his optic nerves. He cried out, falling to his knees in the muddy alley, clutching his head. When he could see again, it was just the rain, the gray stones, the dimming light. The vision was gone, leaving only a throbbing, residual ache and the taste of copper in his mouth. He had to get off the street. He staggered to his feet, swaying, and made for the only place that offered a semblance of cover, a small, unused storage shed near Training Ground 3. He shoved the door open and collapsed inside onto a pile of old burlap sacks, shivering from cold, pain, and shock. He didn't know how long he lay there. The rain drummed on the roof. The pain behind his eyes slowly dulled to a persistent ache. He was drifting in a haze of semi-consciousness when the door opened silently. It wasn't Anbu. The silhouette against the gloomy light was slender, familiar. Uchiha Mikoto stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She held a small basket. She didn't seem surprised to find him there. For a long moment, she just looked at him, lying filthy and shivering on the floor. Her usual mask of calm was gone. In the dim light, her face was pale, etched with a fatigue so deep it looked like illness. Her eyes, those bottomless wells of sorrow, held no restraint now. They drank in the sight of him with a raw, hungry grief that was terrifying in its intensity. Slowly, she knelt beside him. She didn't touch him. She placed the basket on the ground. From it, she took a clean towel, a small jar of salve, and a wrapped onigiri. Wordlessly, she offered the towel. Naruto took it, wiping the mud and rain from his face. His hands were shaking. The silence between them was a living thing, fraught with everything that could not be said. You heard them, she finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. It wasn't a question. He nodded, not trusting his own voice. She closed her eyes, a spasm of pain crossing her features. Then you understand the fragility of the world you walk in. The compound, it is a glass sphere, and they are heating it over a fire. Soon, it will shatter. Why? He rasped. Why does everyone hate them so much? Fear, she said, opening her eyes. They were dry, but brighter with unshed tears. Fear of their power. Fear of what they might have done. Fear of what they might do. And when fear is institutionalized, it becomes policy. Suspicion becomes surveillance. Distrust becomes a precursor to action. She looked at him, her gaze piercing. You carry both reasons for their fear within you. The beast they dread, and the eyes they covet and distrust. You are the village's greatest secret and its greatest potential threat. You must understand this. I didn't ask for this. The words burst out of him, hoarse and desperate. I know, she said, and for the first time, her voice broke. A single, ragged breath. Oh, my child, I know. The endearment, spoken aloud, hung in the damp air like a forbidden spell. They both froze. She looked horrified at her own slip. He felt the word land in his chest like a physical blow, warm and devastating. She recovered, her mask slamming back down, but it was cracked now. You must be stronger than the fate they have written for you. The meditation, are you practicing it? Yes. Sometimes I can see things. Not with my eyes. Chakra. Emotions. It hurts. A flicker of something like clinical interest mixed with deep dread passed over her face. The precursor. The perception of chakra and emotional intent without the ocular focus. It is a side effect of the bloodline straining against its suppression. It is unstable. Unreliable. And it will draw attention if it manifests openly. She reached into the basket one last time and pulled out a thin, black band of cloth. When you feel it coming, when the world starts to pulse, bind your eyes. It will dampen the sensory overload and hide any visible change. It is a stopgap. Nothing more. He took the blindfold. It was simple, soft cotton. A tool for hiding. This is all you can give me? He asked, the bitterness returning. A blindfold? A snack? Warnings? What would you have me give you? Her question was a whisper, stripped bare of all pretense. A name you cannot bear? A home you cannot enter? A love that would sign your death warrant, and that of everyone in that compound? My presence here is a risk of catastrophic proportions. If I am seen, if they suspect. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. He saw it. The delicate balance of terror. Her love was a landmine, and every act of kindness was a step around its perimeter. He looked at the onigiri, the salve, the blindfold. Not gifts. Tools for survival. The only language she was allowed to speak. I saw my name, he said quietly, not looking at her. In an old ledger. Struck out. She went perfectly still. The only movement was the slight tremor in her hands as she folded them in her lap. Then you have seen the truth of it, she said, her voice hollow. You were erased to exist. A living ghost is safer than a dead prince. Remember that, when the loneliness is too much. You are alive because you are nothing. And I. She stood up abruptly, as if she could no longer bear the proximity. I must go. The rain is lessening. Use the salve on your temples. It will help with the ache. She moved to the door, a phantom retreating. Mikoto-san, he said, just as her hand touched the latch. She paused, her back to him. Thank you, he said. It wasn't for the towel or the food. It was for the slip. For the... my child. For the confirmation, however painful, that he was not a cosmic accident, but a consequence of a love that had been deemed too dangerous to live. She didn't turn. Her shoulders tensed, then slumped in what might have been a silent sob. Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her, leaving him alone with the fading sound of rain and the crushing weight of a love that could only ever be an absence. The ghost had met its maker, and found her just as haunted as he was. The cage had a second occupant, and they could only ever whisper through the bars. Chapter 4: The Pressure Cooker. The blindfold became a secret companion, a shameful necessity folded small and tucked into the inner pocket of his jacket. He didn't need it often, but the threat of its use was a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety. The episodes, he began to think of them as spikes, were mercifully infrequent, but they were intensifying. They were no longer just painful, they were revelatory in the worst way. A week after the meeting in the shed, during a particularly tedious academy lecture on chakra theory, a spike hit without warning. The instructor, Mizuki, was droning on about elemental affinities. Naruto was trying to focus, to find that still center, but a fly was buzzing insistently against the window, and the boy in front of him was tapping his foot in a frantic rhythm. The mundane irritants grated against his raw nerves, and the buzzing in his core, always present, took on a jagged, saw-toothed edge. Then, a sudden, sharp anger from across the room. Sasuke Uchiha, frustrated by something in his notes, had clenched his fist, crumpling the paper. The flare of that simple, clean irritation was like a spark in a gas-filled room. Naruto's vision dissolved into a wash of gray static. The world reformed in chakra shadow. Mizuki was a murky, discontented brown. The students were a garden of flickering, adolescent hues, anxious yellows, bored grays, the occasional spike of competitive orange. But Sasuke was a knot of bright, seething blue-white fire, shot through with threads of a deep, wounded crimson. His chakra was beautiful and terrible, a contained star of potent, Uchiha energy. And it called to something in Naruto. His own buried bloodline stirred in answer, a resonant, painful thrum that felt like a plucked guitar string snapping against his ribs. The pain behind his eyes was immediate and excruciating. He fumbled in his pocket, his movements clumsy, and yanked the blindfold up over his eyes just as the world began to pulse with oversaturated color. The soft black cotton helped, muting the violent influx of data to a bearable, throbbing pressure. He sat rigid in his seat, breathing through his nose, fighting the nausea. Naruto? Mizuki's voice, laced with annoyance. What is the meaning of this? Remove that at once. Headache. Naruto gritted out. Bright light. Sorry. The lie was thin, but the strain in his voice was real. He heard the snickers. He felt Sasuke's gaze, a cold, prickling point of focus amidst the chaos of his other senses. He's looking at me. He feels it too? Does he know? See the nurse after class, Mizuki said dismissively, already moving on. The anomaly was noted and filed away. Naruto sat through the remainder of the lesson in darkness, focusing on the internal landscape of his own agony. The spike gradually receded, leaving the familiar ache and a new, profound exhaustion. When the bell rang, he kept the blindfold on, navigating by memory and the sound of shuffling feet until he was out of the building. He removed it only when he was in the dim alley behind the academy, blinking in the muted daylight. He was not alone. Itachi Uchiha stood leaning against the opposite wall, as if he had been waiting. He was in standard ANBU gear, the porcelain mask hanging at his hip, his face expressionless. His presence was so still it seemed to absorb the sound from the alley. The blindfold is a prudent measure, Itachi said, his voice calm. But it is a signal. To those who know what to look for. Naruto's heart hammered against his ribs. What do you want? To assess a variable, Itachi replied, pushing off the wall. He took a step closer, his dark eyes scanning Naruto's face with that unsettling, analytical focus. You experienced a chakra perception spike, triggered by proximity to a potent, emotionally charged Uchiha signature. My brothers. I don't know what you're talking about. Lying is a skill you have not yet mastered, Itachi stated, no judgment in his tone. I felt the resonance. Faint, but unmistakable. Your suppressed biology is becoming reactive to stress and to the presence of its own kind. This is predictable, but problematic. Naruto felt a surge of defiance. Are you here to warn me off too? Tell me to stay away from your precious clan? Itachi's gaze didn't waver. I am here to tell you that the compound is no longer a place of simple tension. It is a fault line. Fugaku-sama's faction meets in secret. The Hokage's negotiators are met with silence or thinly veiled threats. Danzo's root operatives are embedded in the surveillance teams, whispering poison, encouraging paranoia. The pressure is nearing its critical point. Why are you telling me this? Naruto asked, confusion cutting through his fear. Because you are a piece on a board you cannot see, Itachi said. Danzo sees you as a failed experiment, a Uchiha hybrid of unpredictable utility. He may try to acquire you if the situation destabilizes. The clan, if they knew of you, would see you as either a usurper, a contaminant, or a potential weapon to be seized. Your existence, if revealed, would be the spark that ignites the powder keg. The blunt, logistical analysis of his own danger was somehow more frightening than any threat. So what am I supposed to do? Continue to be nothing, Itachi said. But become a more skilled nothing. Your control is pathetic. Your emotions are a siren call to the instability within you. You must master the meditation. You must learn to dampen your own chakra signature, not just suppress the spikes. You must become a gray rock in a stream, unnoticed. He paused. My mother's interventions are based on sentiment. They are risky. I will provide you with practical instruction. Meet me at Training Ground 44, the Eastern Swamp Margin, tomorrow at 0400. Do not be seen leaving your quarters. He didn't wait for an answer. In a ripple of air, he was gone, leaving Naruto alone in the alley with a new, terrifying appointment and the cold understanding that his survival now depended on the tutelage of a ghost who saw him as a variable. Training Ground 44, the Forest of Death, lived up to its name even at the edges. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting vegetation. In the pre-dawn gloom, the twisted trees were monstrous silhouettes. Naruto stood shivering at the designated spot, the swamp water lapping at his boots. Itachi appeared soundlessly beside him, not even disturbing the mist. You came, he said, as if there had been a possibility he wouldn't. The first lesson is silence. Not just of mouth, but of body, of chakra, of intention. What followed was not ninjutsu training. It was an ascetics regimen. Itachi taught him how to regulate his breathing to slow his heart rate, how to move so that each muscle's engagement was minimal and efficient, how to distribute his weight to leave no trace on soft ground. He taught him a more advanced form of the Hokage's meditation, a mental exercise that involved visualizing his own chakra not as a turbulent sea, but as a deep, placid lake, with the Fox's Heat a distant volcano on the far shore, and the Uchiha potential a dormant, sunken city in the depths. The goal was not to interact with them, but to acknowledge their presence and create vast, calm distance. It was brutally difficult. Naruto's body was used to clumsy, energetic movement. His mind was a frantic thing, skittering from loneliness to anger to confusion. Holding the lake image for more than a few seconds was a Herculean task. "Your focus is scattered," Itachi said during their third pre-dawn session, as Naruto panted with effort after trying to cross a patch of dry leaves without a sound. He had failed, spectacularly. "You think of your hunger, your cold, your anger at me, your fear of the future. A shinobi's mind must be a single, sharp point. All else is discarded. Your emotional life is a luxury you cannot afford. It is the fuel for your instability." "I'm not a machine," Naruto snapped, frustration boiling over. "You are a potential disaster," Itachi replied, unmoved. "Machines are predictable. Disasters are not. Choose which you would prefer to be." The words were cruel, but they were not spoken with cruelty. They were a diagnosis. Naruto hated them, but he knew their truth. He swallowed his retort and tried again. Slowly, infinitesimally, he improved. The lake image held for a minute, then 5. His footsteps became quieter. The buzzing in his core, while never gone, achieved a slightly lower, more constant pitch, less prone to violent spikes. He didn't feel stronger. He felt quieter. Emptier. It was a hollow victory. Itachi was a merciless, impeccable teacher. He offered no praise, only correction. He was a mirror reflecting Naruto's every flaw with crystal clarity. But in the fourth session, something shifted. They were practicing chakra dampening, exhaling one's natural chakra signature to blend with the environment. Naruto, straining, managed to mute his presence for a full 10 seconds. In that window, he felt a flicker from Itachi. Not a spike, but a subtle, profound weariness, a sorrow so deep and heavy it seemed to warp the air around him. It was gone in an instant, locked away behind walls of iron control, but Naruto had felt it. When they finished, as the first rays of sun speared through the monstrous trees, Naruto dared a question. "Why are you doing this? If I'm just a variable? If keeping me secret is so important?" Itachi stood looking at the rising sun, his profile sharp and pale. "There is enough tragedy written into the future," he said, his voice so soft it was almost lost in the forest sounds. "Perhaps one small, unnecessary one can be avoided. Or perhaps not. But the attempt must be made." He looked at Naruto then, and for the first time, Naruto saw something like a human being behind the perfect shinobi facade. A boy, not much older than him, carrying a weight that was breaking him. "You asked me once about the walls. I am a builder of walls. I know their cost. I would not see another child buried alive behind one, if it can be prevented." He vanished then, leaving Naruto with a new, complicated knot in his chest. Itachi was not an ally. He was something stranger, a warden trying to teach his prisoner how to pick the lock, for reasons he would not, or could not, fully explain. The lessons had an unintended side effect. As Naruto learned to dampen his own signature, his sensitivity to the chakra currents of the village increased. He began to perceive the tension not as an abstract concept, but as a physical atmosphere. Konoha, in his newly attuned perception, was a body running a fever. The Hokage Tower was a locus of anxious, swirling grays. The ANBU headquarters a cold, sharp silver. And the Uchiha compound, it was a thunderhead of clashing pressures, dark, resentful purples and reds of the elders, the brighter, angrier crimson of the younger hotheads, and here and there, pockets of desperate, fearful blue. He could feel the fault line Itachi described. It vibrated through the very earth. He avoided the compound's vicinity now, not out of fear of being seen, but because the emotional radiation from it was physically painful, like standing too close to a furnace. Then, the incident at the memorial. It was the anniversary of the Kyuubi attack, a day of official mourning he was once again expected to observe from a distance. This year, however, a delegation of Uchiha, led by Fugaku himself, attended the ceremony. It was a public show of solidarity, a political statement. Naruto watched from his usual distant rooftop, his improved control allowing him to muffle his presence enough to avoid ANBU detection. The ceremony proceeded with somber dignity. Then, as the crowd began to disperse, a group of civilian mourners, families who had lost people that night, broke from the crowd. Their grief had curdled into something uglier. They confronted the Uchiha delegation, not with shouts, but with a wall of silent, accusatory stares. One elderly man pointed a trembling finger at the Uchiha crest on Fugaku's arm. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The accusation hung in the air, thick and toxic. You did this. Your clan. Your eyes. Fugaku's face was a mask of granite. He said nothing, simply turned to leave, his clansmen falling into step around him, their posture rigid with insult and fury. The rejection was complete. The village's fear had been made flesh, and it had pointed its finger. From his perch, Naruto felt it happen. A collective snap. A wave of furious, wounded, final crimson chakra erupted from the Uchiha as one, a psychic scream of such intensity it triggered an immediate spike in him. He fumbled for the blindfold, his vision already graying out. But before he could raise it, he saw, with his own eyes, not a chakra vision, Mikoto, who had been standing slightly behind Fugaku. As the accusation landed, as her husband turned away, her eyes found his distant rooftop. Across the hundreds of meters, through the crowd and the misty rain, their gazes locked. In her face, he didn't see anger at the villagers. He saw a pure, unadulterated terror. Not for herself. For him. It was the look of someone seeing the avalanche begin its slide, knowing what it would crush in its path. Then the spike hit in full force, and the world became a cacophony of painful light. He slapped the blindfold on and curled into a ball on the rooftop, riding out the agony. When it passed, the compound's chakra signature had changed. The thunderhead had condensed into something harder, darker. The point of no return had been passed. The pressure cooker, as Danzo had called it, had just sealed itself shut. The heat was on, and there was no release valve. Naruto, hunched and blindfolded on his rooftop, knew in his bones that the fragile peace was over. The ghosts were about to stop whispering and start screaming. And he, the boy who was nothing, was trapped right in the middle of it. Next. Chapter 5, The Scent of Smoke. In the days following the memorial incident, the silence in Konoha changed. It was no longer the tense, watchful quiet of suspicion. It became the hell-breath stillness before a lightning strike. The village didn't just feel divided, it felt bisected. The Uchiha compound became an island, its bridges not burned but under an invisible, official quarantine. Fewer Uchiha patrolled the general streets. Those who did moved in tighter formations, their eyes not just observant but actively scanning for threat, their hands never far from their weapon pouches. The civilian shops near the compound walls reported a sharp drop in business, then quietly began closing early. Naruto's training with Itachi took on a new, grim urgency. The pre-dawn meetings in the Forest of Death were no longer about foundational control, they were crash courses in survival. Itachi taught him evasion patterns, how to move through Konoha's surveillance grid using its blind spots, how to identify root operatives by the particular deadness of their chakra signature, avoid where emotion should be. He taught him basic, brutal counter-interrogation mental drills, how to build a false memory lattice, how to compartmentalize truth so deeply even a Yamanaka probe might miss it. You are preparing me for capture, Naruto stated flatly during one session, after Itachi had him practice resisting a simulated genjutsu by focusing on a single, mundane physical sensation, the grit of soil under his fingernail. I am preparing you for inevitability, Itachi corrected, his voice a monotone. He looked exhausted, dark smudges like bruises under his eyes. The perfect control was still there, but it seemed brittle, held together by willpower alone. The Hokage's authority is being challenged from within. Danzo's faction is ascendant. The Uchiha clan council has voted, in secret, to begin active preparations. The timeline has moved from months to weeks. Preparations for what? Naruto asked, though he dreaded the answer. Itachi didn't look at him. He watched a giant centipede scuttle over a rotting log. For a coup. A desperate, doomed seizure of the village government to reclaim their honor and secure their future. He said it as if reading a weather report. It will fail. It was designed to fail. The cold certainty in his voice was more terrifying than any outburst of emotion. Designed? By who? By the logic of fear. Itachi evaded. When a beast is cornered, it attacks. The hunters know this. They prepare the pit accordingly. He finally turned his gaze to Naruto. You must be elsewhere when it happens. You must see nothing, hear nothing. You are to report to the Hokage's personal archive tower on the night of the next new moon. You will be given a mission, a fabricated, long-distance courier run to a minor outpost. You will be gone for 3 days. You will obey this order without question. It was a deportation. A neatly packaged removal of the inconvenient variable. And what happens here? Naruto pressed, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. While I'm delivering fake scrolls. Justice, Itachi whispered, the words seeming to cost him something profound. And mercy. Of a kind. He would say no more. The lesson ended, and Naruto was left with a churning dread and a forced exile hanging over him. He tried to follow Itachi's instructions, to become a gray rock. But the village's fever was spiking, and he was sensitized to its every tremor. He felt the ANBU rotations triple around the compound. He felt the cold, gathering clusters of root chakra in the forests to the north and east, like knives being slowly unsheathed. He felt the Hokage's chakra, once a steady, deep blue, become frayed and turbulent, shot through with agonized gray. And from the compound, a rising chorus of emotion so potent it leaked through the walls, a fervent, zealous red from the militants, a cold, determined black from Fugaku, and scattered, terrified blues from the non-combatants, the children, the elderly, the dissidents. And Mikoto. Her signature was a unique torment to perceive. It was a deep, still well of blue sorrow, but now a new, sharp strand of frantic, protective green shot through it, a mother's terror given chakra form. It pulsed towards him, a silent, anguished sonar ping, whenever he passed within a certain radius. She was monitoring him, her love a silent alarm bell ringing constantly in her soul. He couldn't stay away. 2 nights before the scheduled new moon deportation, the pull became unbearable. He had to see the cage, one last time, before whatever was coming happened. He used every skill Itachi had taught him. He muted his chakra to a faint ember, moved with predatory silence over the rooftops, avoided the known ANBU sight lines. He was a ghost, perhaps the only one who could move freely between the separating worlds of Konoha. He settled on a high water tower that gave a view over a section of the Uchiha compound's interior, a central courtyard and the backs of several main houses. The night was clear and moonless, perfect for the covert observation Itachi had trained him for. He lay prone on the cold metal, barely breathing. For an hour, nothing. Then movement. Fugaku and Mikoto emerged from their home into the private garden. They were speaking, their voices too low to carry, but their postures were eloquent. Fugaku was a pillar of rigid authority, gesturing sharply. Mikoto stood before him, not submissive, but imploring. Her hands were clasped, her head slightly bowed not in deference, but in desperate argument. Naruto focused, pushing his dulled senses. He couldn't hear words, but he could feel the emotional valence. Fugaku's chakra was a glacier of resolve, cold and crushing. Mikoto's was a storm of anguish and defiance. She reached out, gripping his arm. He shook her off, not violently, but with absolute finality. He turned to go back inside. She stood alone in the garden, her figure silhouetted against the shoji screen's light. Then, she did something unexpected. She looked up, not at the sky, but directly at his water tower. She couldn't possibly see him in the darkness, at this distance, with his chakra suppressed. But she knew. She felt him, just as he felt her. She lifted a hand, not in a wave, but pressed flat against the air, a gesture of stop, of warning, of stay away. A door on the other side of the courtyard slid open. A small figure stumbled out, rubbing his eyes. Sasuke. He was crying, clearly awakened by the argument. He called out for his mother, his voice a thin, plaintive thread on the night air. Naruto watched, frozen, as Mikoto's entire being transformed. The anguish vanished, locked away in an instant. Her posture softened. She turned towards her son, her face, even at this distance, visibly arranging itself into a mask of gentle concern. She knelt, opening her arms. Sasuke ran to her, burying his face in her kimono. She held him, rocking slightly, one hand stroking his hair. Her chakra, moments ago a maelstrom, smoothed into a perfect, serene lake of comforting blue. It was a masterpiece of emotional alchemy, a lie woven from pure love to comfort a child. Naruto felt something break inside him. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was the final, devastating understanding of the price. She could give Sasuke comfort, presence, open love. She could give Naruto only a blindfold, a warning, and a heartbreak so profound it had to be carried in silence. He saw the two halves of her motherhood, the public and the secret, the acknowledged and the erased, playing out in real time under the cold stars. One son held in the light. One son watching from the dark. The pain was not a spike. It was a deep, cold crack spreading through his chest. He pushed himself back from the edge of the water tower, his vision blurring with tears he refused to shed. He had seen enough. More than enough. As he turned to make his silent retreat, a new chakra signature flared to life on the edge of his perception. It was familiar, sure sway Uchiha. But it was wrong. It was careening, chaotic, a brilliant blue-white star-going supernova, saturated with a panic so absolute it was nauseating. It was moving at unbelievable speed, not towards the compound, but away from it, towards the Nakano River. Then it vanished. Not faded. Vanished. Snuffed out like a candle in a vacuum. One moment a beacon of distress, the next a void. Naruto froze, his blood turning to ice. He'd felt chakra signatures disappear before, when people died. But this was different. This was an erasure. A total, instantaneous cessation that left a ringing silence in the chakra atmosphere. A minute later, two other signatures converged on the river's location. One was the cold, complex blue-violet of Itachi, moving with lethal purpose. The other was the dead, hungry gray of Danzo. They circled the void where Shursui had been, then parted. Itachi's signature spiked with the agony so sharp it felt like a blade in Naruto's own mind before it was violently clamped down. Then Itachi turned and streaked back towards the Uchiha compound, his chakra a controlled explosion of despair and resolve. Danzo's signature lingered for a moment, a vulture over a kill, then slowly withdrew. Naruto didn't need to be told. Shursui Uchiha. Shursui of the body flicker. The one voice for peace Itachi had mentioned, was dead. Murdered. And Itachi had seen it. Or found him. Or... The thought was too terrible to finish. The fault line hadn't just cracked, the first major structure had collapsed into the abyss. He fled back to the ANBU barracks, his mind reeling. The compound's chakra field was now a swirling vortex of confusion, shock, and dawning, furious grief. Shursui was beloved. His death would be the spark. He lay in his cot, staring at the ceiling, the image of Mikoto holding Sasuke superimposed over the terrifying void where Shursui's life had been. The scent of smoke was in the air now, literal and metaphorical. The pressure cooker had exploded. The fire was lit. The next day, the news was official. Shursui Uchiha was missing, presumed dead, and apparent suicide by drowning. The village offered platitudes. The Uchiha clan met behind sealed doors. The air tasted of ashes and lies. Naruto received his official orders that afternoon, delivered by a grim-faced chunin from the Hokage's office. A C-rank courier mission to the land of tea, departing at dusk on the new moon. Duration 3 days. He was to report to the West Gate. It was a clean, bureaucratic solution. Remove the anomaly from the blast radius. As he packed his meager belongings, a few changes of clothes, his meditation scroll, the blindfold, he felt not fear, but a cold, clarifying fury. They were sending him away to keep their secrets clean. To let the tragedy play out without the inconvenient witness who was also a piece of the tragedy. He looked at the mission scroll, then at the wall that separated him from the dying world of the Uchiha. He thought of Mikoto's hand pressed against the air. Stay away. He thought of Itachi's hollow eyes. You must be elsewhere. He made his choice. He would go to the West Gate. He would take the scroll. And then, he would disappear from his escort using every trick Itachi had taught him. He would not run to tea. He would circle back. He would be a ghost in the ruins, because the ghost had a right to see its own burial ground. He would not be a variable neatly removed from the equation. He would be the unseen term that remained, watching, remembering. The scent of smoke was now a cloud, and he would walk into it. Not as Naruto Uzumaki, the village orphan. Not as the nameless Uchiha heir. But as the thing he was becoming, a boy made of silence and secrets, ready to witness the end of the world that had made him. Chapter 6. The Night of the Black Moon. The new moon night was a suffocating blanket of darkness, a perfect void in the sky that seemed to drink the light from the village. Naruto reported to the West Gate as ordered, his small pack slung over his shoulder, the courier scroll sealed and secure in his inner pocket. His escort was a single, bored-looking chunin from the logistics division, a man with a forgettable face who introduced himself as Goro. Easy run to the coastal relay, Goro said, checking a manifest without looking at Naruto. Stick close, keep quiet, we'll be at the way station by midnight. Let's move. They set off at a steady, ground-eating pace, following the well-maintained road that wound into the forested hills west of Konoha. Naruto played his part, the inexperienced academy student, asking a few mundane questions about the route, feigning a slight stumble on a route. He observed Goro. His chakra signature was a dull, utilitarian yellow, his attention on the path ahead, not on his charge. He was a functionary, not a guardian. This was a disposal, not a protection detail. After an hour, when the trees were thickest and the darkness absolute away from the road's occasional guide lanterns, Naruto made his move. He used a simple diversion Itachi had drilled into him, a small, localized release of chakra, mimicking the flare of a distant, startled animal's signature, aimed at the tree line to their right. It was sloppy, but effective. Goro's head snapped towards the sound, his hand going to a kunai. Stay here, Goro ordered, moving cautiously off the path. The moment he was swallowed by the undergrowth, Naruto activated the other half of the lesson. He didn't run. He dissolved. He muted his chakra to the faintest whisper, reversed his foot wrappings to hide his tracks, and moved not away from the road, but parallel to it, using a deer trail Goro had pointed out earlier as a landmark. He moved 20 meters, then froze, becoming part of the shadow of a giant cedar. He heard Goro return to the path a minute later, muttering about foxes. The chunin called his name, his voice tinged with annoyance, then with a dawning concern. Naruto didn't move. He regulated his breathing, becoming the gray rock. Gyro searched for 10 frantic minutes, his chakra spiking with anxiety, before cursing and turning back towards Konoha at a run. He'd have to report the ward lost. A black mark on his record, but nothing more. Naruto was just another problem, slipped its leash. When the sound of Goro's retreat faded, Naruto turned and began his journey back. He didn't take the road. He took to the trees, moving with a new, grim efficiency. Itachi's brutal training served him now. He flowed through the canopy, his movements silent, his senses extended. The forest at night was a symphony of chakra, the gentle green pulse of plants, the quick, bright flashes of nocturnal creatures, the slow, deep rumble of the earth itself. He was a discordant note in the harmony, a smudge of conflicted yellow-orange and suppressed crimson, but he kept it contained, a secret held tight against his chest. As he neared Konoha, the symphony changed. The normal, sleepy hum of the village at night was gone. It was replaced by a discordant, rising strain of terror and violence. He felt it before he saw it. A wave of psychic noise, sharp spikes of panic, the cold, clinical focus of killers, and a pervasive, choking grief. It emanated from the Uchiha district. He circled to the north, avoiding the main gates and scaling the perimeter wall at a section he mapped during his lonely wanderings, a place where two ancient, gnarled trees grew close enough to the stone to provide cover. He dropped into a silent alley in the artisan's quarter. The village here was unnaturally still, windows dark, doors barred. The normal night patrols were absent. The air smelled of rain, earth, and a faint, coppery tang that made his stomach clench. He moved rooftop to rooftop, a phantom drawn inexorably towards the epicenter of the pain. The closer he got to the Uchiha compound, the thicker the atmosphere became. It was no longer just an emotional sense, it was a physical pressure, a thickening of the air that tasted of ozone and blood. The compound's walls, once a symbol of proud separation, now looked like the ramparts of a besieged fortress. He found his vantage point on a 3-story tea warehouse with a clear line of sight over the main gate and part of the central square. He lay flat on the tar paper roof, his heart a frantic bird in his throat. He didn't need his nascent, painful perception. He could see it. He could hear it. Fires were burning within the compound, not celebratory lights, but the orange glow of burning buildings. Figures moved in the streets, slender, dark-clad figures with animal masks. Umbu. They moved in pairs and trios, a methodical, lethal choreography. They flowed into houses. There were flashes of weapon light, brief, muted cries that were cut short. It was not a battle. It was a culling. Naruto's breath hitched. His hands dug into the gritty roof. The buzzing in his core erupted into a screaming torrent, but he clamped down on it with every ounce of will he possessed, strangling the impulse to scream, to run, to interfere. Itachi's lessons held: you must see nothing. You must be a gray rock. He was a rock, cracking under the weight of the horror. He saw a group of Uchiha, civilians from their dress, elders, women, attempt to flee through a breach in the eastern wall. Root operatives, their masked featureless wood, were waiting. There was no engagement, no clash of kunai. The root moved with a terrifying, unison efficiency. Silken wires flashed in the firelight. The group fell, a row of collapsing puppets, their strings cut. Then, he saw him. Itachi. He moved differently from the others. He was a streak of impossible speed, a scythe of darkness. His sword was a blur, never flashing, always cutting. He moved through the compound not as an invader, but as a force of nature, an inevitable conclusion. He entered a house where a cluster of Uchiha chakra signatures, militants, their energy bright with furious red, had gathered. The windows lit up with the cold, purple light of fireballs, the sounds of desperate combat. It lasted seconds. The light died. Itachi emerged, alone, his white-bladed sword dark. He did not pause. He moved to the next point of resistance. Naruto watched, a part of his mind detaching, marveling at the horrible, beautiful efficiency of it. This was the perfection Itachi had been drilling into him, turned to its ultimate, ghastly purpose. This was control, weaponized. This was duty, made monstrous. His eyes, aching and dry, scanned desperately for two specific signatures in the Hell's Cape. He found one. Near the main house, Fugaku Uchiha stood in the garden, his back straight, facing the gate. He was in full clan leader regalia. He was not fighting. He was waiting. His chakra was a calm, deep pool of black resignation, an anchor in the storm. Itachi appeared before him, stopping a respectful distance away. Father and son. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. No words were audible from Naruto's perch, but the tableau was clear, a transfer of terrible authority, an acceptance of a cursed inheritance. Then, Mikoto emerged from the house. She walked to stand beside Fugaku. She was calm. Her hands were folded. She looked at Itachi, and even from this distance, Naruto could see there was no accusation in her posture, only a profound, unbearable sadness. She spoke. Itachi's head bowed slightly. Then she turned her head, just a fraction, and her gaze lifted. It didn't scan the chaos. It sought the rooftops beyond the wall. It sought him. Their eyes met across the smoke and blood. In that final, impossible moment, she found him. Her mask of calm broke. For a fleeting second, her face contorted with a love and a goodbye so fierce it was a physical blow. She didn't shake her head. She didn't mouth words. She simply let him see her, see the truth of her heart, unguarded for the first and last time. Then, she turned back to her son, her profile serene once more. Itachi raised his sword. Naruto squeezed his eyes shut. He could not watch. But he could not block out the sound, a single, clean, terrible sound that cut through the distant chaos and echoed in the silent theater of his mind. When he opened his eyes, Itachi was turning away from the two still forms in the garden. He was alone. The head of the clan and his lady were gone. Something in Naruto broke then. Not a spike of pain, but a collapse. The carefully constructed dam of meditation, the lake image, the gray rock, it shattered. The two warring legacies inside him, no longer restrained by his will, roared to life in a sympathetic, agonizing concert. The fox's chakra, a tsunami of red-hot hatred, surged up, howling at the slaughter, at the betrayal, at the sheer volume of death. And the Uchiha blood, the buried city, awoke in a screaming answer. It wasn't an awakening of power, it was an awakening of memory, of shared suffering, of a bond of blood being severed in a river of itself. The world dissolved into a supernova of pain and perception. He didn't need the blindfold. His eyes were open, but he wasn't seeing light. He was seeing truth. The chakra flows of the massacre were laid bare in hideous, vibrant detail. Each killing stroke was a line of cutting silver. Each extinguished life was a fading star. The compound was a canvas of screaming color being methodically painted black. And Itachi was a black hole, a perfect sphere of absorbing darkness, swallowing the light of his clan, his own chakra, a swirling galaxy of agony and resolve so complex it made Naruto vomit over the side of the roof. But amidst the horror, he saw something else. A small, bright point of blue-white terror, hiding. Sasuke. He was alive, cowering, his chakra a frantic, brilliant pinprick in the overwhelming dark. Naruto's vision tunneled. The pain behind his eyes was a white-hot brand, searing, permanent. He felt a hot, sticky trickle down his cheeks, not tears, but blood. The sensory overload was tearing him apart. He saw the history of the Uchiha in flickering, ghostly afterimages, pride, suspicion, love, fear, all leading to this night, this pyre. He saw Mikoto's face, not as it was moments ago, but as a younger woman, holding a newborn with blonde hair, her eyes full of a terror that was just beginning. He saw the ink stroke through his name. He felt the cold of Danzo's gaze in the examination room. The two legacies weren't fighting anymore. They were merging in their shared, reactive agony. The fox rage and the clan's grief became one overwhelming wave of resonant trauma. He didn't know how long the vision lasted. It felt like an eternity crammed into seconds. When it finally receded, crashing back into the confines of his skull, it left devastation. He was lying in his own sick on the rooftop, trembling violently, every muscle screaming. The blood from his eyes had soaked into the fabric of his blindfold, which had fallen from his pocket. The world was dark, blessedly, normally dark. The compound's fire still burned, but the sounds of killing had ceased. An eerie, smoke-choked silence had fallen. He forced himself to his knees, wiping his face with a trembling hand. His fingertips came away smeared with red. His eyes felt raw, abraded, as if someone had rubbed sand into the sockets. He could still see, but everything was too bright, too sharp, edges defined with a painful clarity. The afterimages of chakra lingered like ghosts at the corners of his vision. He looked back at the compound. It was a tomb. The Anbu and root were gone, vanished as silently as they had come. Only the fires remained, and the silence. Then, a new sound. A single, high, shattered scream. It was Sasuke. It echoed from within the compound walls, a raw, uncomprehending sound of absolute loss. It was the sound of a world ending. Naruto heard footsteps on the roof tiles behind him. He didn't have the strength to turn. He knew who it was. Itachi stood over him, his Anbu armor spattered with dark stains, his sword sheathed. His face was a pale, blood-flecked mask, empty of everything. His eyes, when they met Naruto's, held a depth of hell that made the earlier visions seem tame. "You saw," Itachi said. It wasn't a question. Naruto could only nod, a jerky, broken motion. "You were not supposed to be here." I had to." Naruto's voice was a ruined croak. Itachi studied him, his gaze taking in the blood tears, the tremors, the shattered boy before him. "You have seen the cost of the secret. The price of peace bought with lies and blood." He knelt, his movements stiff. He reached out and, with a terrifying gentleness, wiped a smear of blood from Naruto's cheek with his thumb. His touch was ice cold. "Remember this night. Remember what happens when clans plot against the village. When children are sacrificed for ideology. Remember the price of rebellion." He was speaking lines. A script for a sole survivor. But his eyes were saying something else, something desperate and broken. This was the only way. The only mercy left. He stood. Sasuke will live. He will hate me. He will seek power. That is his path now. He looked down at Naruto, and for a fleeting second, the mask of the perfect shinobi vanished, revealing the boy who had just murdered his world. Your path is darker. You carry the truth no one can ever know. You carry the blood of the clan and the beast that destroyed it. You are the living grave of the Uchiha. Remember that. And be nothing. He turned and was gone, a shadow dissolving into the greater darkness of the night. Naruto was left alone on the rooftop, the dawn's first gray light beginning to bleed into the eastern sky, illuminating the rising pillars of smoke from the Uchiha compound. The scent of smoke was now the scent of a funeral pyre for 300 souls. And for the first time, he understood his name, his real, unspoken name. He was not Naruto Uzumaki. He was not the nameless Uchiha heir. He was the secret that had survived the purge. He was the ghost of a ghost clan. He was the boy with blood tear tracks on his face, who had seen the love in his mother's eyes an instant before her death, and the hell in his brother's eyes an instant after. He was a living monument to a lie so vast it required a massacre to sustain it. And as the sun rose on the new day, on a Konoha that would publicly mourn a tragic, unexplained loss, Naruto knew one thing with absolute, chilling certainty. He would never be able to forget. The night of the black moon was now etched behind his eyes, in his blood, in the very structure of his chakra. He had become a witness. And the memory was a poison, and a power, and a prison from which he would never, ever be free. Chapter 7: The Living Grave. The dawn after the massacre did not bring light, it brought exposure. The rising sun illuminated the smoke, turning the gray pillars over the Uchiha compound into accusing fingers pointed at a cloudless, indifferent sky. From his rooftop perch, Naruto watched as the first official responders, not NBU, but regular Konoha military police and medical teams, tentatively approached the main gate. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackle of dying embers and the distant, mechanical call of a bird. He should have fled. Itachi's final command echoed in his mind, be nothing. But his body refused to obey. He was welded to the rooftop by a shock so profound it had become a physical state. His muscles were locked. His mind was a white, buzzing void, replaying a single, horrific slideshow, Mikoto's final, unguarded gaze. The clean, terrible sound. The afterimage of Itachi's empty eyes. The smell. He didn't realize he was crying until he felt the wind chill the tear tracks on his cheeks, mingling with the dried blood. He raised a trembling hand to his face. His eyes felt swollen, tender, as if he'd stared directly into the heart of a furnace. The world, when he forced himself to look at it, was preternaturally sharp. The grain of the tar paper beneath him, the individual leaves on a distant tree, the minute expressions on the faces of the medics gathering at the compound entrance, all were etched with a painful, hyperreal clarity. It was the echo of the vision, a permanent shift in his perception. The Sharingan had not awakened, not in any usable form, but something in his visual cortex had been scorched and rewired by the trauma. Movement below. The medical teams, wearing masks against the smell, were moving in. Standard procedure for a disaster zone. He saw one young medic stumble back out of the gate, rip her mask off, and vomit into the street. The controlled, official reaction was beginning to crack. He had to move. If he was found here, covered in blood vomit and shock, questions would be asked that had no safe answers. With a groan that was more a whimper, he pushed himself up. Every joint ached. He gathered his fallen pack, his fingers fumbling on the strap. The courier scroll for the land of tea was still inside. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh, a choked, hysterical sound that died in his throat. He used the drainage pipes to descend, his movements clumsy and loud to his own ears. He hit the alley and leaned against the cold brick wall, breathing in ragged gasps. The normal sounds of a village waking up were absent here. This sector was holding its breath. He needed to get back to the ANBU barracks. It was the only place he had to go. He pulled his jacket hood up, hiding his face, and began to walk, keeping to the walls, avoiding the main thoroughfares. He passed a newsstand. The early edition was being put up, the headline monstrous in its blandness, Tragedy Strikes Uchiha Clan. Investigation ongoing. The copy below would be full of cautious, sorrowful platitudes, hints of a terrible, internal conflict, assurances of village stability. A lie, sanitized for public consumption. People were gathering in small, shell-shocked clusters, speaking in hushed tones. He heard the words. Coup, mass suicide, illness. The village was constructing its narrative, in real time, grasping for any explanation that didn't implicate itself. He was 2 blocks from the barracks when he saw them. 2 rude operatives, their featureless masks somehow more terrifying in the daylight, standing at a corner, scanning the sparse foot traffic. Their chakra was that familiar, dead gray void. Looking for stragglers. Looking for anomalies. Looking for him. Naruto ducked into a recessed doorway, his heart hammering. He couldn't let them see his face, see the state of his eyes. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out the blindfold. It was stained with blood and grime. He tied it quickly around his head, the world going mercifully dark. He took a deep, shuddering breath, calling on Itachi's drills. Gray rock. Nothing. He muted his chakra, smoothed his breathing, and stepped back out onto the street. He walked past the rude agents, his pace steady, unhurried. A boy in a hood with a blindfold was odd, but not necessarily a threat. He felt their dead gaze sweep over him, linger for a second, then move on. He didn't exhale until he turned the next corner. The ANBU auxiliary complex was in a subdued uproar. Operatives came and went with grim faces. The normal barrier of indifference was gone, replaced by a palpable tension. Naruto slipped into a service entrance he'd used before and made his way to his room. He locked the door behind him and sank to the floor, his back against it. The silence of the small room was a physical pressure. The images he had locked away came screaming back. He curled into a ball on the thin tatame, the blindfold still on, and wept soundlessly, his body racked with tremors he could not control. He wept for Mikoto. He wept for the nameless hundreds. He wept for Itachi, trapped in a hell of his own making. He even wept for Sasuke, the proud heir now utterly alone. And he wept for himself, for the boy who had just learned what his existence had cost, and who now had to live with the weight of a genocide in his blood and in his memory. He didn't leave his room for 3 days. Food was delivered, a tray left outside his door by a silent attendant. He ate little. He slept in fitful bursts, plagued by nightmares where Mikoto's loving gaze melted into the cold steel of Itachi's sword, where the smoke from the compound filled his lungs until he choked. He practiced the meditation relentlessly, not to find peace, but to build a dam against the flood of memories. The lake image was gone, shattered. He replaced it with a fortress, a mental stronghold with thick, blank walls behind which he could hide the screaming child he had become. On the 4th day, there was a knock, not the soft tap of the food delivery, but an official, firm rap. He didn't answer. The knock came again. Naruto. It's Iruka. Open the door. The voice was weary, strained. Naruto slowly got to his feet, his body stiff. He untied the blindfold. His eyes still ached in the light, but the sharp, painful clarity had receded to a manageable level. He opened the door a crack. Iruka stood there, his face drawn, the circles under his eyes as dark as bruises. He looked like he hadn't slept since the massacre. He took in Naruto's appearance, pale, haunted, thinner, and his own expression softened with a pain that had nothing to do with the village's general grief. May I come in? Iruka asked quietly. Naruto nodded, stepping back. Iruka entered, closing the door behind him. He didn't sit. He just stood in the middle of the small, bleak room, looking lost. You weren't in class. After what happened? I was worried. I was sick, Naruto mumbled, the lie automatic. I know you were assigned a courier mission that night, Iruka said, his voice careful. The mission log says you got separated from your escort in the woods west of here. You returned on your own yesterday afternoon and reported to the Hokage. It was the cover story. Neat, bureaucratic. The lost ward found. Naruto said nothing. Iruka sighed, running a hand over his face. Naruto, look at me! Reluctantly, Naruto raised his head. Iruka's eyes searched his face, and Naruto knew what he saw. Not just the pallor, but the eyes themselves. They were still blue, but the blue had changed. It was harder, older. The whites were faintly bloodshot in a way that spoke of more than a few sleepless nights. And in their depths, Iruka saw something that made his breath catch, a reflection of the horror, a knowledge that no child should possess. You saw something, Iruka whispered, not a question, but a dreadful realization. The night of the tragedy. You weren't in the woods, were you? Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through Naruto's numbness. I got lost. I came back. That's all. Naruto. Iruka's voice broke. I'm not your enemy. I'm not here to report you. But by the gods, if you were anywhere near that. He swallowed hard. You have to talk to someone. That kind of thing, it eats you alive. I'm fine, Naruto said, his voice flat, dead. I didn't see anything. I was delivering a scroll. The lie hung between them, brittle and transparent. Iruka looked at him for a long moment, a war of duty and compassion playing out on his face. He knew. He might not know the specifics, but he knew Naruto was carrying a secret wound from that night. And as a shinobi of Konoha, he knew some wounds were better left unprobed, for the safety of the patient and the village. Finally, Iruka's shoulders slumped in defeat. All right, he said softly. All right. But my door is always open. If you need to talk. About anything. Not as a teacher. Just as someone who cares. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small, wrapped bar of honey candy, the kind he sometimes gave out to students after a tough test. He held it out. Here. Naruto stared at the offering. A simple, human kindness. It felt alien, like an artifact from a lost civilization. He took it mechanically. Thanks. Irika gave him one last, pained look, then turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. Naruto looked down at the candy in his hand. He unwrapped it slowly and put it in his mouth. The sweetness was cloying, overwhelming, a violent contrast to the ash and blood that still coated his tongue in memory. He swallowed it, the sugar a lump in his throat. He was alone again. But the aloneness was different now. Before, it had been an empty space. Now, it was a crowded tomb. He was alone with 300 ghosts, and a mother's final love, and a brother's damned choice. He went to the small, clouded mirror above his sink. He looked at his reflection. The boy who stared back was a stranger. The features were the same, but the eyes. Irika was right. They held a stillness that was not peace, but shock frozen in time. They were the eyes of a survivor of a shipwreck, still adrift in a sea of wreckage. They were Uchiha eyes, not in color or power, but in the depth of inherited tragedy they now held. He was the last secret of the Uchiha clan. Not Sasuke, who would carry the public legacy of vengeance. Him. The boy with no name, no claim, who knew the truth of the slaughter. He was a living grave, and the epitaph was written in blood and silence on his soul. He tied the blindfold back on, not because he needed to hide a spike, but because the darkness was a comfort. It matched the world inside him. He lay back down on the floor, the taste of honey still faintly on his lips, a tiny, mocking spark of sweetness in the vast, encompassing dark. He was nothing, as Itachi had commanded. He was a void. And the void was full of ghosts.